Welcome everybody. I'm Steve from ADISA. We're here to talk about the release of Standard 8, the new requirements for data sanitization. Recap a little bit. Back in August of last year, we ran a webinar and I introduced the proposal for making these changes. I then asked for volunteers to sit on a steering group where we went through the proposed changes that I would have liked to have made, and we refined them over time. So the committee did a great job. They sat for 2 or 3 meetings, but gave me lots of feedback as well. And then we released our proposed changes to you all in about January of this year. And then we took the feedback, and then we sat again on another couple of meetings. The document that I shared with you on Tuesday of last week, version 6.2, is our final version of the data capability requirements for all certified companies to Standard 8.0. And what the purpose of today is to go through that document as well, to answer some of the questions that I know you can have, to give you the opportunity in the comments to ask Q&A now, but most importantly to talk about the transition process from today through to everybody now being aligned to these new requirements. I'm not expecting this to be any longer perhaps than 15 minutes, so if you have questions, please feel free to jot them down. So I'm just going to go through the document, if I may. The opening piece here, I'm going to whiz through because it's just definitions. James, you're here. Thank you, James. Has corrected some of the definitions with me, James Derrick. Just to make sure that everybody's aligned to exactly what are we talking about when we're talking about storage media and products. So these are just definitions for you to have a point of reference and also to have your customers a point of reference to. The most important bits is the specification itself. Now, we believe, and I'll talk on behalf of the steering committee, that these changes, the impact on you as an ITAD, should be reasonably low. The impact on the software vendors could be significant depending on how mature their product is. But we'll go through this a little bit as we explain it. Now, what we've done within the requirements is we've completely reinvented how it's presented to you. So the document looks very different than the current one. And that's the reason for that, is that we're trying to be more sophisticated. There are different levels of sanitization, some better than others. There are also some vulnerabilities which we've managed to overcome as well. So this is a much more mature and developed specification for the ITAD community. Now, what we've done on the standards, we've broken it into media type, which typically is magnetic, solid state, and hybrid drives. And then we've also added tape to that. In the second section, we talk about products. So that will be how different storage types, flash is used in embedded. So MacBooks typically we're seeing at the moment, networking devices, phones, etc., etc. So the storage technology is the same, but its implementation into products is treated differently because you introduce the host at that point as well. So the first table to go through and just explain is the media type. And this has been broken down into dial 1, 2, and 3. So we're following similar approach to the way that Standard 8 is written. We are referencing terms that are commonly used in NIST 888 and the new, it's 2 years oldish, IEEE 2883. And that's the concept of clear and purge for logical sanitization for reuse. So at dial 1, we're requiring that a clear is undertaken. And in most cases, that would be an overwrite. But at dial 2, that the software that you use attempts purge. If it can't purge, because purge may not be supported, it can drop down to a clear without having sign off from the customer. And at dial 3, the software can only be successful if it purges. Now, the rationale for that is that clear is viewed in many parties as a lesser sanitization technique than purge. And so when we're talking about the high risk club, dial 3, they would not expect, if you're saying yes, you must purge, they would not expect to see you clearing from a logical perspective storage media. Certainly not without their approval, prior approval. So dial 1 is clear. Dial 2 is attempt purge, and you're allowed to drop to clear. And dial 3 is purge only. Now, these are all configurations in the software that you use. So if you're using a mature product, I won't mention brands because it's not fair, but if you're using a mature product, they will have these options. So most of the drop downs for algorithms, they'll have USDOD 5220 and Gutmann and all that type of good stuff, but there will also be NIST purge, NIST clear typically. And that's what we've seen in the lab, that we've seen this type of functionality. So first of all, that's what we're expecting from you to configure your products depending on what dial your customer is. Now, this is all about the onus on your software service provider. If the software that you're using doesn't offer these type of functionality, we have to really doubt its credibility in the new world of pointing at sanitisation standards like IEEE 2883, and really getting behind these type of standards to make sure that we're, as an industry, compliant with them. Your software configuration as well will also allow you to configure the verification. Now, this does build increased production time because you've got to go back and verify sanitisation. So we've aligned this to the requirements of IEEE as well. So 5% of the user addressable area to be checked for both dial 1 and dial 2. This is a software config. You should be able to do this within the software. So from an ITADS perspective, it will be an invisible process, maybe a bit more time on the bench. But for dial 3, it's going to be 100%. And this is just configuring your software tool, making sure that your software tool offers clear and purge, and make sure that it offers the ability to verify clear and purge. The question now is, what software tool do you use? Well, they've got to be independently tested against a published standard. So something like NIST 888 or IEEE 2883, they're the two main ones that we're recommended you point at, but there are other standards available. So from an international perspective, there are other standards. There's a Canadian standard, there's also an Australian standard. So if your requirements as a business, most of you are UK, if your requirement as a business is to point at one of these other standards, you're allowed to do that. Within the audit process, we understand what standard you're pointing at, and that's what we'll audit you against. Most of you, we would recommend, will point at NIST 888 or IEEE 2883 because they're the prominent or the most widely recognized data sanitization guidelines and standards which are available today. If you have a customer, a one-off customer that says, I want you to use a DoD 5220-MM sanitization or Gutmann, or a HMG IS5 enhanced, you can still do that as an exception. So we are building into this specification the ability for you to have the odd customer that means that you have to deal with a customer expectation, and enables you to do so if you follow the exceptions rule, which is lower down on that document now. So just to reiterate across the bulk of the storage media that we're processing, we're aligning the requirements to the dials. We're aligning the requirements to clear and purge from reuse. We're specifying the percentage of verification that you need to do. And you must be using independently approved products that can verify that they meet those guidelines that you're choosing. Now, for most of you, we don't see any real change in your business. Most of the companies that we are certifying are using mature products. And that means that they have this type of functionality. And this means that you should, with a little bit of procedural change, be able to meet these requirements reasonably easily. Now, the procedural change would just be a little bit more of a focus on what customers are coming through, what their dial rating is, and therefore what the configuration of your software is at that time. And that may require a little bit more procedure to be in place around the benches. But in terms of the software functionality, you should already still have this. Now, from a destruction perspective, we haven't changed that. So we still talk about the platter and the NAND cells being physically impaired, stop its operation and aggregation. So that's exactly the same as it is now. We referenced degaussers because that wasn't in the previous one, but it was in the main standard 8. So we just brought that in now. So nothing's changed there. So at the moment, the only difference across the magnetic hard drives, SSD and hybrid, is we're now pointing at the requirement to meet these published guidelines or standards. Rochelle, I haven't got to networking yet, so I'll come on to that in a second, if that's okay. On magnetic tape, tape is an absolute miserable storage media for us to process as an industry. Shredding is largely used as a defensive countermeasure, but it's also not perfect, as we know. And all of you will know with the shredders deep in your hearts that it comes out in quite a long strip, unless it's done really, really appropriately. So within magnetic tape, we are allowing reuse under dial 1 and dial 2, and there's KIT, the Insurgo device. It doesn't hold any approvals as yet. We tested it back in 2016, but it's never been retested since. So at the moment, as far as we're aware, there's no tape reuse solution out there that holds any approvals. If there is, you would be able to reuse tape under DIAL 1 and DIAL 2. For DIAL 3, it's not permitted. So we'd be expecting you to destroy tape. Now, within tape, we are changing the treatments. We've seen enough long linear pieces of tape out in the field to say that a shred which still leaves 6-7 inches of tape available is not correct. So we're highlighting 2 of 3 treatments that you must follow. Now, in the ideal world, we'd say incinerate, but the incineration companies in the UK are not signing data processing agreements. So we can't have that as the first data processing activity because you would not be compliant with law. So what we're saying is that there will be a 2-stage process. You can either degauss, shred or degauss. You can do that yourselves. That's okay. We'd accept that. Or you could shred, then incinerate, or degauss, then incinerate. This is a real belts and braces approach to this storage media because we do see an awful lot of it being mistreated, not being dealt with appropriately by the customer, first of all, because they don't see it as a storage device, but also because it is so difficult to deal with some of it being stockpiled and the cage full of tape eventually being treated. And so we're going to be a bit more prescriptive on the treatment of tape here because we need to make sure that it is being treated appropriately. So it's going to be 2 out of 3 destructive processes, or if you find one, a approved solution for reuse. As I state, I don't believe there is one at the moment. Very happy to be corrected on that, but I'm not sure that there is one. So these requirements for media, the only real difference is aligning it to DIAL. The only real difference is understanding your software tool that you're using and understanding the different configurations and make sure that's aligned as well. But mainly on tape in terms of how you treat and destroy tape. That's the main difference there. Now, when we roll forward, and Rochelle, I'll come on to the networking piece because it's the biggest change about all of this, by the way. We move down to the next one. Some of you know we see more and more small form factor laptops now, rather than having a dedicated area for its storage and SSD in a typical sense, NVMe, we're seeing storage now distributed across boards, particularly with Apple devices. Now, the problem with that is that how you then sanitize that storage, you have to use the host to do that. And so it gets quite complicated because it doesn't behave in a normal way. And so embedded storage, of which we're using the laptop as the example here, needs to be treated differently. We know, because one of you in one of the steering committee raised this with me very recently, we know that there are very few approvals for embedded storage today. And this is expensive equipment, MacBooks. We don't want to be destroying them. But ADISA's only tested one product for embedded storage, a Chinese product. And we spent nearly 5 months testing it for level 1. We were unable to create a level 2 attack because we could not read the raw storage either with the data recovery tools that we've got or directly to them using chip readers. The technology doesn't exist. We're looking at fabricating some solutions for that at the moment. But as of today, for embedded storage, the requirement is you must use a product that has been recognized by an independent test laboratory. As far as we're concerned, there is only one product out there, which is Chen. I could be incorrect here. There may be other test labs doing stuff. We've not seen it. So this is an area where we need to try and look at the software vendors to start getting their products tested. It doesn't have to be through ADISA, by the way. It could be through any other independent test lab. We're very happy to look at other certifications in that area. And because we know that level 2 is not impossible at the moment, but technically not viable today, this is where you'd need an exception. We want you to reuse MacBooks, definitely. You've got to reuse MacBooks by using a product that's been tested on them and other embedded storage, of course. But at the moment, we've only been able to do level 2. So you're going to need to go to your customer and say, are you okay with me using a product that's been tested with only to level 1? And the customer will say yes, because the cost of these stuff and the financial gain is going to be so high. But the written word is going to say it has to be a level 2 product. We know at the moment it's possible to comply. We expect to be able to overcome that in the coming months as we're building some stuff. Again, the destruction on embedded, it references back down to the impairment of the NAND cells. All the embedded storage is going to be flash-based, so we're building it back into NAND cell destruction. So it's a similar process to SSD. On a practical side, how you do that with embedded on boards, well, it could mean that you actually need to start taking these devices apart so you can get to the board to make sure the board is destroyed appropriately, or some other physical process that impairs the NAND cell. But again, these products are expensive, so we probably want to be looking to repair and reuse in every possible eventuality. Rochelle, I'm going to come back to storage at the end because that's networking at the end, if I may, because it's the one which is most contentious. So I'm going to drift past networking devices and look at smartphones. This hasn't changed. It's exactly the same as it was before. You can reuse smartphones using a product that's been independently tested. And to destroy smartphones, you have to make sure that every NAND cell is being impacted by whatever destruction solution you're putting in place. So nothing has changed there. IoT is a new category. We're seeing more and more of this. We've got some, funnily enough, I could get a prop out. I've actually got some AirPods underneath my desk that we've been asked to test. I'm not sure that they have any storage in them, but we've been asked to test that on behalf of a company. And so we're moving into this area as a test laboratory, and we've got smartwatches being looked at the moment and other bits of IoT. So this is an emerging area. We're not expecting you guys to be seeing an awful lot of this as yet. Some of you are seeing bits and bobs, but we're not seeing an awful lot coming through. So this category here bundles it all into one area, one category, if you like. The problem with IoT is its inconsistency. The architecture of the devices, a lot of them are hardware with the cloud host, if you like. They're really variable in terms of the way that they're designed. So it's impossible for us to specify exactly how to treat this because we just don't know, because there's so many different varied solutions. So for IoT, the process that we expect you to follow is to do a little bit of investigation, understand the architecture, understand where volatile storage may be, and understand how you can mount that device before you can sanitize it. Now, this sounds quite a burden. This sounds quite a burden for the ITAD, but your software partners are looking at this area. We know that because we're speaking to a dozen or so of them, because they see this as an emerging area. So if you're beginning to see IoT coming through in smartwatches, games consoles, any wearable tech, you need to be reaching out to your software vendor and start putting the onus on them to come up with solutions for this technology. If you're not, then you need to be looking at a destructive process. Reset on these, some of the standards rely on resets, and they say you must perform factory reset in accordance with manufacturer's guidelines. That's hugely vulnerable. We've got not anecdotal first-hand evidence where the reset doesn't work. And so that isn't a hard rule across all different types of IoT, but we've seen it often enough to cast doubt that it can be trusted in all instances. And so where IoT is concerned, we're looking for you to understand the technology, looking to understand what type of storage is there, and to use products that have been tested on that particular type of storage. And this is where you need to put pressure on your software vendors to say, what portfolio of products am I able to use your products on? In reality, with the volumes that you're treating, you may end up with a destructive process for this. We just don't know as yet, but it's an emerging area. I haven't forgotten, Rochelle, we'll come back to networking. If you look further down, printers, again, hasn't changed. Understand the printer that you're processing, understand what type of storage, whether there's any non-volatile storage on it, understand whether that can be removed. If it can be removed, treat it as a hard drive. We've seen less of that, of course. If it's embedded, do the factory reset, because that's the best that we can do for equipment that's the price point that this will be, but you'll need to get written approval from your customer for that process. We've never tested any factory resets on printers, and the general view is that the way that printer buffering is set up these days, it's more or more just a dumb device. We're not seeing a huge amount of really intelligent stuff. With the multi-function device from maybe 8 or 9 years ago, this would have been a much more complex area, but we've not really seen that evolve. And a lot of businesses now are moving away from type of printer network anyway. However, when you are getting printers through, we'd be expecting you to do this type of triage. Understand what you've got, understand whether there's any volatile storage on there. If there is, what type of storage is it, embedded or removable? If it's removable, remove it, treat it as the media type further up the table. If it can't be removed, do the reset, but get the customer to approve that transaction on your behalf. And again, nothing's new there. Destruction on this, you need to remove the storage media if it is removable and destroy as per the previous table. And if not, you'll be looking at, if it's embedded storage, be looking at making sure that every NAND cell is impacted from that. Moving down, we've got SD cards, USBs. We're not encouraging reuse. The simple reason for that is the cost associated with the resale value. For us to start putting controls in place for you using approved products on USB sticks, it's a really complex area. We've been asked to test an American product at the moment, and it's far more complex than you would have believe. So right now, today, and the steering group agreed with this, is that SD cards, USB thumb drives, and things like that are not going to be permitted for reuse. We're going to go straight in for destruction, which could be degaussing if it's magnetic hard drives, or shredding such that the device is physically inoperable and all the NAND cells have been impacted. So it's similar to the requirement above. Again, we've included optical and paper. It's not a sweet spot for ADISA, but we've included in it, and we're not allowing reuse on either. Again, purely and simply on what's the price point of the ability to resell shredded paper or to resell optical discs if you're able to reuse them. We're going straight for destruction for the same reasons as before. Now, I've raced through all of that because the main difference being this piece here. We'll cover networking because that's a major difference, but with this piece here, previously it said you needed to use an approved product, whereas now what we're saying is that you have to use an approved product that has some functionality. And that's the big difference. This will be you leaning on your software vendor to make sure that the software that you're using has this type of functionality. Now, we've done a straw poll of certified companies, and we feel that most of the products being used today have this functionality. There may be one or two that need tweaking. I'm not going to mention names, that's not fair. But we don't feel that this is going to be a hugely onerous burden for your software partner to comply with, which is good news. And the reason we're doing this is that we're trying to get behind IEEE 2883 and really drive that forward as a data sanitization specification or standard that your customers can point at. Because we hear it all the time, customers don't know what to do. They're pointing at legacy standards, they're writing their own standards, or they're giving us something that's not fit for purpose. By making these changes, we collectively as an industry can promote a standard that you can comply with, which means the customer's specification, whether it's in a tender or a contract, should get narrower for you to meet, which is good all round. Now, I will do networking separately. Has anybody got any questions on the first bit? I have raced through it, which I apologize for, but have we got any questions on the first bit? If not, I will crack on. Yeah, so Rochelle, that's a good question. Let's talk networking. We're about to release a white paper. Factory reset is not being permitted. It's the biggest change. It is vulnerable. We can prove it. So we have not done it on a large sample size, but we have done it often enough for it to be an identified problem. If you speak to organizations in the networking space, they know this as well. And so we are going against NIST 888 and we're going against IEEE 2883 because they permit the reset. We're not allowing it because we have evidence that it's vulnerable. That causes a problem for many of you because a lot of you at the moment are doing the factory reset as your default position. So we're not going to permit that. You'll see that there's no exceptions there. And the simple reason being is that we know it's vulnerable. So we can't even, it would be hypocritical of us to allow an exception to permit a process that we know is not correct. And so we need to start engaging with our customers, start getting them to specify the right type of treatment for networking devices. Now, what that treatment is at the moment is two things. You can use some software. We have tested 2 pieces of software. They're on our website, or I should say one of them is a hardware solution for working on networking devices. This is a really complex area for them because every network device, much like IoT, its architecture is different. And some of it, the behavior of it is different as well. And so the software vendors need a little bit of support in this space as well and patience because they need to add each product type to their supported list. So they need to go through all their testing and things like that. So the supported list on some of these solutions is quite small. But we are going to be permitting software for use on networking devices, and we've approved 2 products already. We are also going to be permitting humans, where you can have a manual process following a written methodology for you to actually perform a reset and then remove, because this is the issue with the reset, it retains certain storage or data in certain storage areas. You then need to go and manually remove that. You need to know where to look. We don't on all of them. We just knew on the sample that we've seen. So the reset doesn't remove everything. There needs to be a secondary process for going in and removing certain data from certain storage areas. This is quite complex. There are companies out there who know how to do this, so we know it can be done. We can't specify this because we would be giving away their IP, and it's not fair because they've given us some advice when we've been looking on this. So within this space, this is a decision for the ITADU to make. You can either do one of three things. Factory reset's not allowed anymore, so that's not on the table. You can either look to the software solutions that are available. Again, potentially expensive, but they are available. Depending on the volume that you're getting through, it could be a viable solution. So you could look for software. You could train your staff to become, if they're not already, but to become better in networking devices, to know how to analyze the architecture, to do the reset, and then to know where to go and look for some of these system config files and things like that need to be removed. Or you could use a specialist downstream, and they exist. They are around, and they're within the ADISA group as well. I'm not mentioning because that's not fair. But there are companies who already do this. So the solution is there. That's why we're introducing this. We know the solution's there. It may not be with you. It could be with a partner that you need to work with. Now, all of these options for you are available, but you're going to need to consider what works best for you, depending on your volume, your appetite for skilling up, or existing contracts, etc. So that's the biggest change, because I think we did a straw poll back in November on Makeup. It was like 85% were doing factory reset. It's not acceptable anymore, and we're seeing that more and more, by the way, across different technologies where the reset doesn't really work properly. It's leaving bits and bobs left, which that's a highly technical phrase, leaving bits and bobs left, which is enough of a concern for us to actually blanket ban it. From a destruction perspective, it's the same. Platter impaired, NAND cells impaired, stop the physical operation and aggregate it. To answer your question, Michelle, if you go to our website and you go to the ARC website, so if you go to ADISA.global, which is one that you may be familiar with, and you look at product certification, it'll take you to our research center website. If you go to product claims test, and then you've got different storage types, they'll be embedded there. There's physical destruction, there's smartphones, SSD, magnetic, and there's also networking devices. You'll be able to see the two there, which you're going to have a look at. But the decision is there for you to make on the volumes that you've got. Either opt straight destroy, use a partner downstream, put the necessary contracts in place to make sure you have customer approval, use and invest in some software that is fit for purpose for this, or skill up and become good at the manual processes yourselves. Now, there are some guidance notes below, which I'm not going to go through here. They just provide more context to some of the requirements up here. We hope, and certainly the steering group feedback was that it made sense. But you're not silly people. This isn't your first rodeo. When you read this, you'll probably recognize 95% of it. So we're hopeful that when you have time to digest it properly, that it will make sense, first of all, which is good. The second bit that we need to do is to help you with the transition from the old data capability requirements to the new one. And that's the key bit to go through today. Now, we are going to be coming out to each and every one of you between now and October. So I should stress, this has only been released to you. This is not in the public domain yet. But we'll be coming out to each and every one of you between now and October to do a data capability audit. So that will be booked. And that's going to be a slightly different feel, which when we release it next week, you'll explain why this is, where there will be the submission requirement for the written word, some process documents, other types of physical paperwork that we can review, a new data capability template for you to complete. And we will be expecting that to be a remote part of the audit. We will then come on site and we will be doing the same type of stuff that you've experienced before, but we also reserve the right to bring protocol analyzers on site. So if you're not using a software that has been tested to an acknowledged independent laboratory, it may be that it is independent, but it could be a far-flung place. We've seen one from a Hungarian test lab. We don't know them. We don't know the credibility. We have no reason to doubt it, but what we're going to do is double check. And so we would reserve the right to bring protocol analyzers on site and actually start looking at what's going on from the software to the storage, just to make sure that it is compliant with these standards. But the process for you should largely be the same: a remote assessment and a site assessment to verify compliance. Now, during this window of May the 1st today to October the 1st notionally, you're going to have a free shot at this, because if we find issues during those audits, you will be able to fix them because it's new. If we're finding data, that's a different conversation to have, because that shouldn't be there. But if we're finding some variations because of the changes that we made, it will be a non-conformance, but we already know the reason why, because it's new. So there's nothing to worry about you getting an auditor to come on site and effectively finding issues. Don't worry about it. The whole point of this round of audits is to give us the opportunity to identify where there's going to be some gaps in the new requirements and to give you time to fix them before we make the public release. And we're going public with this at the conference on October the 17th. So we're going to be talking about this as a new specification. We're also going to be talking, there's John Michael Hands, who's coming in from the States, who's going to be launching IEEE's 2883 into the UK. And so we're going to be trying to align those two announcements together, safe in the knowledge that collectively you and us have had 5 to 6 months of already working with each other to make sure that there's no nasty surprises or hangovers that need to be addressed. So I appreciate that this may seem unwelcome. Why change something that doesn't need changing? But the fact is, it did need changing. The previous specification was very high level, and we needed to bring it up to date, and we also needed to get ahead of the curve. To go back to the August webinar, if we don't write this specification and IEEE gets accepted wholesale, which it is, it's already being written into lots and lots of the big tech companies' requirements, Dell being one. If we don't control that narrative, it's going to cause problems, because IEEE does not accept shredding or physical destruction. It only accepts incineration. And I've already pointed out to them that's going to be a huge non-conformance in Europe because of the inability to actually get an incineration entity to sign data processing agreements. But they seem slightly blind to that. So by getting ahead of that, we're beginning to have an alternative for the European-based customers to point to, an alternative that suits the industry because it's achievable, but also suits it from a technical perspective. So it's got to be credible. And so that's our whole reason for doing this, is not vanity, I can assure you. It's really about being able to get something which is an alternative to a published standard that we are going to adopt, but we are adapting. And this is the adaptation now. So I did try and keep it to 30 minutes. I had a bit of a mess at the beginning, so I got it on time. I'm hoping that that makes sense. If not, please reach out. We're going to put up a new Q&A section on our website for other certifications. That'll be going live tomorrow. If you have a question about this requirement, fill out the form online and you will get an answer. But that answer will be shared as well with all of you. So please read through this, have a think of where you are today, what gaps you may have. I would very much suspect you should be leaning on your software vendor, because we believe that most of this will be a requirement for them from a logical sanitization perspective. Less so on networking equipment, because there's a decision for you to make, but on all the other technology, it's typically a software vendor. And to see if collectively both ADISA, you and your software vendor can work together to take this bar, raise the bar higher. We will be, in terms of scheduling the audits, we will be offering, if you want to be audited quickly, so you have more time to fix, just reach out to lisa.mellings@adisa.global. We will be building out our audit schedule and booking. These are booked audits. We're booking them in probably from mid-May onwards. I'm only saying that because it's the 1st of May now. It's a short week next week in the UK. So we'll be booking these from mid-May onwards. So if you want to be higher up on that list, reach out to Lisa and she'll put you on the waiting list and get you booked in as quickly as we can. So I hope that answers some questions. I hope it gives you some context. I would publicly like to thank the steering group. I'm not going to mention names because, knowing me, I will probably forget somebody and I'll upset them, but they will be put onto the bottom of this document once I get their approval. I'd really like to thank them for taking part. This wasn't a quick process that we went through. We started it in August. There's probably been half a dozen, if not more, meetings and an awful lot of debate taking place. And I'm sure you can appreciate why, where we want to push something which is both achievable and credible, but not onerous. And we hope that this document has reached that nice, happy medium. So if there are any questions, drop them in the text. And if not, you have questions afterwards, go to the website, probably from Friday onwards. It's Wednesday today. Friday onwards, there'll be a Q&A part of the menu that you'll be able to ask questions on that, and you'll get an answer typically within 48 hours. Other than that, I wish you all a very happy rest of the day. There's no more questions coming out. So thanks very much, everybody. And thank you for your time. Once again, thank you to the steering group. It is very, very much appreciated. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.